Hello, this is Jose Palomino again, and I'm your host for the Revenue Throughput Podcast. And today's guest is Amy Franko of amyfranko.com, and Amy is an expert in helping organizations establish sales process, sales methodology, especially in the high-tech space. And she brings a fresh perspective to all of this. It's very exciting, and we're very pleased that we can have her on the Revenue Throughput Podcast today. And we're going to dig in right now. And welcome, Amy, to the Revenue Throughput Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. Amy, first of all, just maybe to frame things for our audience here, if you could just expand a little bit on who you typically work with.
Yeah. So my background is actually tech. That's where I got my start. And then about 15 years ago, I pivoted into entrepreneurship. And so what that looks like today, it's taken a lot of twists and turns, but what it looks like today is I primarily work in the mid-market space, mid-market on up. And I work a lot with professional services firms. I work with technology organizations, could be hardware, software, but I am typically working with their sales leadership teams and their sales teams on skill development and sales growth initiatives. So that could look like a consulting engagement. It could look like assessment, skill development. So it can run the gamut within a particular client, but it's really all focused on sales growth and upskilling the sales organization. It is a lot of fun, and I love the work that I get to do.
Wow, so the high tech space is where I actually cut my teeth in business, and I'd worked in that space for probably over 10 years. And I've had occasion to work with software companies and so on, even in this incarnation of my firm. So I'm kind of curious what you see is as you talk to these people, and you talked about assessment, diagnostic, and so on.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest challenges you see that's like maybe a common thread?
Yeah. So the pandemic of last year really helped me to take a look at where there were some gaps in my business and what I was offering my clients. And one of the things that I really uncovered for myself was this need with my clients for more of that front end diagnostic, that data driven approach, if you will, to really understanding the performance of the sales team. Who's on my team? Do I have people in the right roles? What are the strengths and weaknesses of the team? Because using data versus going off of just gut instinct or intuition, that was a gap. And that's a gap that I continue to see, to come back to your question. That's a gap that I continue to see in organizations, and the sales organizations specifically that want to start using performance data to help them figure out, all right, where to next with the development of my team. They're the ones that get further faster, and they have a better, more engaged team in the end.
But now, what's interesting about that, especially in the spaces that you mostly gravitate towards, so technology and IT and software and so on, they've been on modern CRM platforms for a decade now, at least, right? You know, and mostly Salesforce, but not exclusively. It could be other permutations. So somebody listening might say, well, wait a second, they're already on the most cutting edge platforms available, and yet you're finding this data gap. How does that square?
Oh, yeah. So, it's interesting. Having the CRM doesn't mean that we use it effectively or appropriately. No matter what CRM you're using, whether it's one of the big blue chip companies or maybe something a little more entrepreneurial. So that's one of the biggest gaps that I see. Some of the firms that I work with, they're actually just on the beginning stages of CRM, especially if they're smaller firms.
Okay.
Then you will have firms that, yes, they're definitely more entrenched, they're more mature, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're always capturing the right information in the CRM or using it to help aid the sales process. It starts to become more cumbersome versus being an enabler. So that's a gap that I see, is CRM data being useful and applied to client relationships, client situations, to help an opportunity move through or to find a new opportunity in that client or prospect.
So do you ever see a situation, and I ask this because I've actually seen this, where the opposite issue, which is an over dependence on the quantifiable, the data set, but they've moved away from just saying, well, the reality is that client just doesn't like our rep and we need to change that rep out, which is like the human factors, things like that. I'm just curious if you see the tension in the other direction.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great perspective because sometimes it's easy to be overly reliant on the data. And I do think that there's a balance between what the data is telling us and, the human factors. I've seen that quite a bit where maybe there's just not the right chemistry isn't there, or the right skill set isn't there between the seller and the client or the prospect. And yeah, you do have to make a change, or you need to decide, is this the right client for us? Is this the right opportunity for us? Sometimes we're just chasing the wrong opportunities. We're chasing the wrong clients. So taking time to diagnose sort of what the root cause is it a data thing, or is it a human factors thing that we need to think through maybe a little bit differently?
Interesting. And one of the areas of data that really fascinates me, and I've worked with a wide range of clients on this, and I imagine you have as well, which is the whole idea of forecast percentages and numbers. So I've often seen where what is being counted towards making something a 90% probable is all internally facing activities. We
Hmm.
submitted the proposal, we submitted the budget, we did this, we did that, we had these meetings, and they don't really capture what's maybe things that would be truer indicators of probability on what the client is saying, and so on. So have you seen that tension where maybe we're tracking things and we feel good about the forecast on paper, but it's nowhere near reality? Like forecast is just magic thinking.
Yes, yes. You've ever had those scenarios, and I've had this happen to me as a seller. You are getting to the end of the quarter, and you have forecasted this deal, and something falls through, and then you got to go back to your leadership team and be like, "We've got to push this out a quarter. We've got to push this out 2 quarters." Sometimes those factors are things that they're honestly beyond our control. Something that happened within the customer or the client, budgets got cut, whatever happened. There certainly those things do happen, but what are the things that are in our control? Maybe I didn't qualify it well enough. Maybe I wasn't in front of the right decision maker. I've had that happen. Maybe the solutions that I put forth, they need some fine tuning. So I like to think about it, or encourage leadership teams and sellers. What are the factors that you can control in that situation? And are you really focused on the customer? Like what else can we learn to help us move this thing forward? And I've always kind of struggled with probability, to be honest with you, because it's like, well, the deal's either going to close or it's not going to close. And when I put probabilities in my pipeline and I'm looking at 70% or 90%, if I have $1 million deal, it's either going to close or it's not going to close. And I need to be really honest and brutally honest about where I'm at in my pipeline. That's one thing I always recommend people do, especially in beginning stages. Do a really brutally honest clean out of your pipeline. Do not put the hopes in there, just clean them out so you have a really good view of what you're looking at.
So I had a sales mentor early in my sales career, which is a long time ago. As my kids would say, when the dinosaurs, roamed the earth. Uh, the who would say, you have to really be careful for happy ears.
Yes.
You want to just hear the clues. So you had a meeting, and he said, "Well, that was a very informative meeting." The client says, you go back, and in your happy ears, just say they're very interested. No, they were polite. They weren't very interested. They
Yeah.
just they.
Oh, that's, yeah, and I don't know if you've ever done a Strength Finders assessment.
I have not.
Yeah, so it's a leadership assessment. Strengths Finders is what it's called, and
Okay.
it assesses you on 34 different capabilities. And one of my top five strengths, to your comment there, is positivity.
Okay.
I am always looking for the positive in something, which is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's a great skill to have, or a great strength to have. On the other hand, it could definitely lead to happy ears, and what I need to challenge myself or have someone challenge me on, okay, what does all that really mean? Do we really have an opportunity here? Is this
Right.
really going to move forward? Because my positivity can sometimes creates happy ears and can cloud my skepticism.
Wow, it clouds your skepticism. I love that optimism clouding your skepticism. It's a great turn of phrase there. So I'll be borrowing that. Uh, you
Excellent.
know,
Anytime.
well, one of the things I've just had been fortunate to have some really great sales mentors in my career, in my life, just friends and stuff. And So they always say these pithy things that really ring bells. So one is time kills all deals. Right. So my friend Steve always says that. So like when you miss a deadline, when you thought it was going to happen and it doesn't happen, the probability is like an inverse proportion to what the likelihood of it ever happening, because there's a reason it skipped a date. If you thought it was going to be like this quarter and it pushes out, sometimes beyond our control.
Yeah.
But so the whole time issue, could you just comment a little bit, Amy, how when you coach folks and sales teams, how you help them understand like the time factors in especially a complex deal that has many moving parts?
Yeah, so the timing of this question is great because I think the pandemic threw a wrench into a lot of sales cycles. I was looking through my CRM and I literally just closed a deal. I'm not kidding you. It took me 565 days.
Wow.
It got stuck because of the pandemic. And it's that's one of those kind of out of your control factors. And so when you think about some of those deals that are stuck, why are they stuck? So this particular deal was stuck because of the pandemic, and I made a decision to stick with it. It languished for a while, but and then there was some change at the client, some of the folks I was working with. So you layer that in on top of everything else that's happening. And it was a matter of staying in touch with them, on a quarterly basis, seeing where things were at. And interestingly enough, it loosened up toward probably the beginning of this calendar year, it loosened up and it ultimately closed. But I did not have, I knew that if it wasn't going to close, I wasn't counting on it. I was going to continue to work it and see what happened with it, but I had to find other opportunities to put into that pipeline. So I agree with your friend Steve. Time does kill deals. It absolutely does. The longer something languishes, the lower the odds. Now, my opportunity was probably a bit of an outlier, and with the pandemic, I would encourage people, look at all your deals. Do you have some that maybe have languished because of the pandemic that can be dusted off, or do you need to just set them aside? The trick is you can't depend on it. You have to keep taking control and filling the pipeline.
Yeah, and I think also in light of that too, the pandemic, obviously slowed some businesses' ability to move forward. That's true.
Yes, totally.
But it also caused some people to maybe get kind of like a free shot at a buyer's remorse movement. In other words, they didn't spend the money yet, and now they had time to think about it, and you would have already been delivering, whatever your
Oh
service.
yeah.
But now they get a chance to think about it and say, well, I don't know. And so I guess the point is sometimes the the selling, and I don't mean by this the pushiness or the manipulation, anything like that. I believe in high integrity selling, like either I bring something of value or not, and
Yeah.
you either see it. But the connecting the dots on that value, you can't slow down on that. You can't stop because people get busy and then they forget why they were so excited about working with you or me, 6 months ago when we had that conversation 6 months ago. That's a lifetime ago. We just saw that in this year. So reminding people, hey, this is going to really impact X, or this is the ROI you were looking for. That's still there for you. Is that still important? And kind of getting people back to what that loving feeling, as the loving spoonful song, right? Getting back that loving feeling way back.
Well, I think you hit on something there, which was the one question of, is this still important to you? And that type of question, especially for those of us that might have a little happy ears syndrome, that type of question can be hard to ask because you may not want to hear the answer. That old adage, don't ask questions that you don't
Mm-hmm.
know the answers to. um, I think we have to retrain our brain on that, because when something kind of stretches out and you go back and say, hey, this is what we talked about a couple months ago, this is where you were. Is this something that's still important to you? Is it something that's a priority for you? You have to have enough internal fortitude to be okay with what the answer is. And if the answer is, this is really dropped down on our priority list, okay, what do you think you'd like to do next? What's a next conversation point for us?
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got to be confident to pivot and say, I'm not going to spend any more time here for the time being. I've got to go back over here where I have these opportunities to work.
Yeah, so I look at some of my clients are like in industrial categories. They make machines and things. So maybe they had a big capital outlay that was talked about to buy new machines. Is that still important to you? Well, it turns out no, we're going to extend the life through preventive maintenance on the machines we already have. But that means they're going to buy a lot more wear parts, which, by the way, is probably a higher margin business. So if you can't pivot on that, or if you're unaware of that, they're going to give the wear part business to somebody else. They're not buying the big new machines from you because you just stayed on that track and you never asked that one question. So I think that's great, Amy. I think that's a very practical way to approach it.
Well, and just the idea of having another solution set potentially in the back of your head. Because I work with some clients, I have some manufacturing clients, some of my clients that are in technology, especially if they're selling hardware, they will kind of similar to your clients. They will come up on renewals for hardware or need to do technology refreshes. They might hang on to that hardware for another year, another 2 years, just for various reasons. And that idea of when you hear that, kind of being able to dig into it a little bit more, and then being able to pivot with a new idea on how you could keep moving forward together, not just being stuck on the one path.
Right, right. Because if you get stuck and the client is on a different lane, then you're not aligned anymore. But you may be the last one to know it.
Right, right. They're over here in this right lane. You're in the left lane. They're slowing down. You're speeding up, right?
Right, and that also, it's interesting because there's a couple of thoughts here, and I would love to hear your take on this. So one thing that made the rounds in selling the last 10 years is Challenger, right? So the Challenger sale and so on.
Yep.
So I happen to believe the very top performers tend to use a Challenger type modality, and that they actually have something to offer, and they can actually challenge the prospect to think about something. The problem is Challenger often gets implemented poorly by people who are not equipped to really challenge a senior executive on their business model or anything like that. Like, you got to have the chops to pull that off. So that's just one major trend. And now everything virtual. And then, of course, there's a generational shift. Sellers are younger. Buyers are jumping into the buy cycle much deeper into the funnel now. They're doing all their research. They're 80% decided before they even involving a salesperson. So as you work with a team, Amy, what do you see as maybe the one, two, or three top things you always want to make sure a sales manager or a VP of sales or a CEO is aware of? Like, hey, if we're going to do anything with your team, let's make sure we do this, this, and this. What are kind of those things that, I don't mean that every deal is the same for you, but that typically you'd like to make sure those three things are locked down?
Yeah, yeah. So if I imagine a conversation with either a CEO, a VP of sales, a sales manager, their calendars are double and triple booked. Their mind is full of all different types of things, not just the sales side, but other priorities that they have going on. So when I'm having these types of conversations, there are typically two things I will try to learn about and uncover, and then see where it leads from there. Really successful organizations they do a lot of things well, but when it comes to sales, they are successful with their process and they're successful with their methodology. And those two things are intertwined, but they are different. So I think of sales process like your staircase. Those are the steps that you're going to go through. And they typically have a linear, they're linear, and they might line up in your CRM. This is the ideal set of steps that you would take a deal through. Then you have your methodology. Methodology is, and I have designed and I facilitate a methodology with my clients that I then lay on top of their sales process. Methodology is not necessarily, they are the skills, the tools, the strategies, the solution approaches that you have in your toolkit to pull from that can help you move the process along more effectively, more efficiently. And you're not necessarily, I think of it like the chess match. These are the things that you're thinking about, and you're thinking 5 steps ahead to say, all right, how do I put these things into place to line up on process? So I teach a methodology that focuses on mindset, advisory intelligence, relationships, compelling proposals, and key commitments. And there are tools and skills within those categories that someone could apply to their process. So it's a long answer to your question, but when I'm talking with a CEO or sales leader, I will try to dig into what does your process look like in your organization? What's your staircase? And what does your methodology look like? What's your chess match? How are you thinking ahead strategically? And that will tell me a lot about them, how they function, where there might be some gaps and some potential for us to work together.
And I'm sure you run into the process is not a staircase, but it's like a rope ladder.
Can't be. And so, sometimes it looks like this.
Right. There's a couple of rungs missing along the way.
Right, right. Sometimes you got to double back to the beginning part of the process because you missed something. Yeah.
Yeah, but I love the methodology. And could you just hit those 5 steps of your methodology again? Mindset was the
Yeah,
first one.
sure. Mindset, advisory intelligence is the second one. Relationships,
Okay.
compelling proposals, and key commitments. If you get those 5 things right, and I'm not saying that they're easy, but if you get those right, most of them right, you're going to be well ahead of your competition, and you're going to be well on your way to really helping your clients and winning more business.
So isn't one of the implications of this, Amy, is that if you have those 5 things and you agree to what those things should look like,
Yeah.
they also frame how you hire, like who you're going to fill into those roles. Because some of these things, as much as we like to think we can always train up or skill up people, whenever I've worked with people, I always say, we can move anyone up 2 notches, right? So like if you give me an 8, we can make them a 10, but if you give me a 3, we can't make that a 10. It's hard to cross that chasm. So
Yeah.
so this seems like a nice framework for like who are you looking for to be on your squad.
Yeah, and I think that could be a whole other conversation. Do you have the right people on the team, and what is the capability of the people on your team? How far can you move them along, and what's the investment that it's going to take to move them
Mm-hmm.
along? And if you get them from a 3 to a 5 or a 5 to a 7, what's that going to mean in your business? And those are tough conversations to have because we're talking about people, and
Sure.
I don't want to minimize that. But those are some of the tough decisions that face leadership, not just sales leadership, but leadership across the board.
No, that's great, and I think that's incredibly useful to our listeners to just think about how they, do they even have a standard that they're holding their sales teams to? And I've
Yeah.
seen in a lot of smaller organizations, it's kind of like, well, it's everybody's at a best efforts basis, and if they put the numbers on the board somehow, they must be doing their job. And as you said, that CEO owner especially is already busy with 17 other things that I got to make the bank today. So they're hoping it works itself out.
Well, and on that comment of hoping that it works itself out, I've been working with some clients recently who, up until this point, haven't had a lot of formal sales skill development. And so they've made the decision to make the investment. And it's interesting to watch how that starts to unfold in the organization, where people are like, huh, they're really serious about this. And they want to make sure that they have the right sales culture. And the high performers are saying, hey, this is great. You might have people that are struggling, or maybe they're not interested in it, saying, I wonder why they're doing all of this. And it does change, it wakes people up.
Sure. Well, it's like you're turning the heat up a little bit in the kitchen there.
Yep. Kitchen's
And-
getting a little hotter.
That's fantastic. Well, Amy, first of all, just thank you so much for just a wonderful time that we could have digging into these things. These are really some of my favorite heart topics. I love this stuff. And it seems like, the work you do is of high impact, and the audience you work with, I'm sure, get a lot out of working with you. If our listeners wanted to learn more about you and how to work with you, where should they go? We'll have this in the show notes, but sometimes people just listen. I like them to hear from you.
Yep. So I'll give you 2 places. LinkedIn, you can always find me there, Amy Franko. And then I will also send people to my website, amyfranko.com. There's a lot of great free resources out there, podcasts, videos, ebooks. So a lot of resources out there to help you build your skills.
Okay, and that's Amy Franko with a K. Right?
That's
Just to
right.
make sure. All right, very good. Amy, once again, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, and just good luck to you.
Jose, thank you so much. It was great to be here.